afternoon, everyone. And I'm Milton Chen, and I'm very pleased to be here at American Canyon High School. I was telling some folks who were here earlier, I'm a longtime technology advocate. I'm one of the old guys, and I remember when Q first started in the early 80s. I was a graduate student at Stanford, and I went to some of the early Q meetings. Mike Lawrence was saying that a fellow named Steve Jobs keynoted at the second Q conference in San Jose. So there you have it. We've come a long ways. Really exciting time. I think this is the time for technology. Mike was also saying we got to get away from just saying technology, but media and all the different ways in which tools can be used to advance the kind of learning we want to see. So thank you for coming, and I hope today's session about what I like to call weapons of mass instruction can help us think further about where this is all going. So in today's session, I'm going to talk especially about one-to-one programs, but also about this notion of whether, as I said in the program, if you read the program description, whether this idea of every student now having an affordable device of their own can combat the notion of weapons of mass destruction. Can this access to the internet, new tools, personalized learning, being able to base your own learning on your passions and your interests now, not just being beholden to what your school or your classroom presents. If you're lucky, you go to a good school, a great school. This looks like a really fantastic school, doesn't it? I think someone said it's about 3 or 4 years old. Someone here from American Canyon? 3 or 4 years old now. Great facility. But a lot of students don't have this. So how can they really advance their own learning? So that's what I'd like to talk about. I do believe that this idea of the use of the internet is somehow creating a more peaceful world, is leading us by lifting the level of education, not just in our country, but around the world. Also the chance for our students to talk with students in other countries. It should lift the whole idea of global understanding and move us towards a more peaceful world. There's already some statistics being shown that, in fact, despite all the news about the wars and the strife going on around the world, there are less people being killed through warfare now than there were even 25 years ago. I have to confirm that, and those of you with your devices, that's another great thing, to talk with a group of folks who all have their own devices. Lids up, as they say. Lids up. Maybe you can confirm that by the end of the session. Just find a statistic about the decrease in death thanks to a more peaceful world. So I'm going to talk about a number of things, but I couldn't resist showing this, this image. I wrote a book called Education Nation about 3 years ago. And in it I talked about, could education really become a national priority? And could we become a learning society? You're familiar with that phrase. Could we become an education nation? What would that be like? I've had a chance to go around, since my Education Nation book came out about 3 years ago, around the world and visit with educators very much like yourselves, classroom teachers, school heads and principals, administrators around the world who are all having the same conversation. How can we use digital devices, get to a one-to-one classroom, fast broadband access to the internet, and there are some countries that think very differently about this than we do. Believe it or not, although we invented, I think we can take credit, can't we not, for inventing the internet, inventing these technologies. We are like 20th or maybe 25th among nations in broadband access. Again, you can confirm that, but the last time I looked, some figures from NTIA, the Telecommunications Administration, showed us about 20th, 22nd in broadband internet access. These couple countries right here, Singapore in particular, have much better access to technology for their students and broadband than we do. The bottom bill is from Taiwan, and I like to say that we'll know we're an education nation when we're showing images to ourselves every day, maybe on our currency, maybe on other images we're looking at, of children learning. But I thought this was a kind of a startling moment for me to see images of children learning on currency. You know, these are $2 or $5 bills roughly that people are looking at every day in Taiwan and Singapore. Perhaps unrelated, but I like showing that. So here's our website. I think you're familiar with edutopia.org, and during the course of this hour, I'd be glad to reserve some time for more conversation. Love to hear your thoughts about how you're using web resources, including ours. I'm just curious, since it's October, how many of you have visited edutopia.org maybe this year, in 2013? Wow, this is a very sharp group, very technology-using group. So I won't spend too much time on it, but just to say that our website has grown tremendously. In its content, we've filmed about 200 schools, stories, and the reason that Mr. Lucas created our foundation was to really present these stories on film, documentary films about innovative schools. And we've been at it for at least 15 years. Our first film was done fall of 1997. In that film, we went down to Clearview Charter School in Chula Vista, California. We filmed a story of 3rd and 4th graders learning about insects. And they would collect insects in their backyards, in their schoolyards. One of the boys wanted to find a wasp. And they'd bring them to school. But the key thing about that project, project-based learning, and they're beginning to use the internet a little bit for getting web resources, was they could send their insects to a nearby university, San Diego State, and connect up, video conference, very expensive back then, and in real time, talk to those scientists and look at their insects under a scanning electron microscope. So everyone at that time, this was only 15 years ago, said, wow, that's amazing what technology can do. But back then, people would say, well, that's great for them. Those kids are very lucky. That's not us. We don't have a fiber optic cable connection. We don't have a nearby university with a scanning electron microscope. But just 3 years after that, the National Science Foundation funded a project, and you can find it, and your kids can do this, called BugScope. They gave a grant to the University of Illinois to bring their scanning electron microscope online. So, of course, this movement to bring scientific instruments online, telescopes, microscopes, is a tremendous help to our students who are very young students who can now take advantage of this. But that was the beginning of really showing how technology is changing and becoming much more powerful. So your students can do it. Just go to BugScope, search on BugScope. You'll see UIUC, which is University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and you'll see the Beckman Institute, which is kind of a STEM center for them. And you'll see the schedule of, well, I don't have to show you this, you can look at it yourself. You'll see the schedule of sessions this fall, and one of the best ways to learn about this project is to just go in and lurk. Go in and log in at the time that some of these classrooms around the United States are talking with these entomologists at University of Illinois, and just see what happens. One of the great things about that project is they found, that it's best for elementary school students and high school students to actually talk with a graduate student at University of Illinois, to talk with someone who's just maybe 10 years older than they are, who's embarked on a profession to study insects. So that was our first project, 1997. We filmed it. You can see it online. Just search on Edutopia, and the entire documentary was called Learn and Live. You can hear the voice of Robin Williams narrating this wonderful story. I like to also note, at the time, in 1998, when we started promoting this film, the way in which you shared film, documentary film, and sort of supporting stories, articles, was we made 100,000 VHS cassettes and a book. That's how we shared knowledge. And of course now, just 15 years later, look at what is now possible. So I'm encouraged about the use of technology to share this information so quickly around the world. Educators can be having these conversations and really learning from each other. I don't have to tell this group that, but it's very exciting what's now possible just 15 years later. And YouTube, we'll look at some videos off of YouTube, just 8 years old this year. It's astonishing. This is a recent homepage from the site, and apps for teaching kids to code. One of the most important things we're learning now in this whole transformation is stuff that we thought was too complex for kids at a certain age can now be taught much earlier. Kids can learn, young kids can learn computer science concepts, can learn to code, create apps in the elementary school grades. I hope some of you during the conversation might point out ways in which you're doing this. But that is one of the lessons of all this, is kids can learn stuff earlier than we thought. I learned that lesson, believe it or not, with Sesame Street, working there in the 1970s. Sesame Street still stands as one of the greatest educational innovations of our time. for preschool education. And it's hard to remember, but the stuff that's taught on Sesame Street, back when it started in the late 60s, coming out of the Head Start movement, the war on poverty, a lot of educators said at the time, there's no way. There is no way you can teach 3, 4, and 5-year-olds beginning phonics, early mathematics, classification, cognitive skills. We're trying to teach that to them when they're 5, and they don't get it. So it's just one early example of how media and technology, by providing a different kind of experience for kids, can teach kids things earlier than we thought. I think that's also part of the excitement of this time. You've seen our films, and through a partnership with, there's a little reminder to come to American Canyon. Through a partnership with Pearson Foundation, we've promoted some films from other countries. So much talk about Finland, Singapore. PISA results coming out soon this fall. Pearson Foundation has created some films from Singapore and from Canada, countries around the world, and we help promote them on our site. Again, great to be able to see these classrooms that are often talked about as the world's leaders. So I want to talk a little bit about this notion of one-to-one and weapons of mass instruction. Of course, Seymour Papert was one of the early visionaries in this whole field. And if you look at where we've come from, Seymour Papert said this very early on, this will only really happen when it's one-to-one. When it's 5-to-1, again, please check, help me understand the latest on the current student-to-computer ratio in the United States, maybe from 2011 data. Last time I looked, it was more like between 5 and 6 kids per computer in American schools. If you come up with the answer, just raise your hand and we can share this information. But of course, when you think about it, it's true. If you had to share your device with 4 other people, how far would you get in terms of your own work, your own access to information? Even at 3 or 4-to-1, it needs to be 1-to-1, and we've gotten to that time. For the cost of a textbook, we can give each student a device, and there are so many districts around the country, and of course here in California. Very exciting to see one-to-one programs. Some of you who are involved, I'd love to have you come up and talk a little bit about your one-to-one programs and what kind of devices you're using. I thought it'd be useful to look back a bit, just a bit. Try to answer this question. When was the first one-to-one laptop program? Any guesses about that? Now that you're armed with internet access, you can come up with the answer very quickly, but just guess out loud. When do you think it was, and any idea about where? 98? 91? A little louder? Okay. 90's good. 90's right. Where do you think the first laptop program was? Not here. Australia, yeah, this is a sharp group. Okay. I think, and based on the research that I've done, and there's been a book written about it, it was Melbourne, Australia. Don't be misled by the name of this school. Funny thing is that as you go around the world, people call our schools different things, and this is actually a secondary school. It's 5th through 12th graders in Melbourne, Australia. The Methodist Ladies, it's a girls' school, college, and there's the book that Bob Johnstone wrote about it, and it happened first in 1990. Look at the size of those laptops. So how far have we come? It's been amazing. This is the first laptop program that we covered, Mott Hall in Harlem, New York. If you can look closely, it says 2001. So it took a long time for the first laptop program in Melbourne to come to the United States. And I would say, yeah, when someone said 1998, maybe that was around that time. Mott Hall has a great piece of research on the early laptop program they developed. In fact, showing that the alums of Mott Hall went from the middle school into high school and beyond. Very good college-going rates, very good careers coming out of these kids. It'd be great. I like these retrospective studies. It'd be great to go back to these kids 15 years later and interview them and say, what was that early experience like? We're seeing that in Maine, for instance. Maine is still, I think, the only state where every middle school student has a computer. And they started in 2001. So that's the first coverage we did on the website, and you can see that as well. One of the great things I like about this film is when you see the students, they are, again, doing work that you wouldn't expect they could do for their age group. 6th, 7th, 8th graders. They're 8th graders, it's in the film, girls, who are studying the coral reef ecosystem. And they're using their computers to analyze samples from the coral reef ecosystem and the connection between the ozone layer depletion and the health of the reef ecosystem. And in that film, these are 8th graders, 13-year-olds in Harlem, who are talking about that relationship. The coral reef, of course, is literally the canary in the coal mine. When the coral reef begins to disintegrate because of the hole in the ozone layer, then everything falls apart in the oceans. And when things fall apart in the oceans, things fall apart on land. Sylvia Earle is one of our most distinguished marine biologists, and she likes to say, no blue, no green. So everything we're doing to improve our lives here on land depends a lot on what's happening in the oceans. And these kids were learning all about that. They were doing college-level work, and they were 13 years old in 8th grade. So this is the project-based learning program in Maine, and they emphasize it's about PBL. It's not about technology. It's what technology, of course, enables you to do. Still the only state, statewide, that provides a laptop for every middle school student. And this movement was led by Governor Angus King, now Senator Angus King from Maine. I think that Angus King is the only senator who knows how to make a website. He's a great technology leader. I hope someday he will come to Q and talk about his work. This again goes back to 2001. He ran as an independent and was re-elected to 2 terms and ran as an independent. You may have followed him for his senatorial campaign in 2012. But he's a real technology leader among all the senators. And, you know, looking at the news coming out of the Senate and the House, and he is one real leader who understands education and understands technology. When he left after 2 terms, he went on what he called a road school expedition. He took his family in an RV and traveled around the United States. And he filed reports about what they were learning as a family. And you can see that website. It's called Where's Molly? So that's Governor King, now Senator King's website. And he made that website to blog about what they were learning as a family and what his daughter Molly was learning on that expedition, that piece of expeditionary learning. So I admire Governor King a lot. Keep calling him Governor King, Senator King. In this coverage that we did, going back 2001, and then we went back about 4 or 5 years ago, he says that he got a lot of criticism for doing this statewide project. He says that a lot of folks said, why are you investing our state money in laptops for kids? And Governor King said, I want our state to have the most digitally literate workforce. The timber industry has gone away from Maine. I want our kids to have these skills so that companies will want to come to Maine. And there's some evidence that that's going on now. 10 years later, the companies are seeing the quality of the workforce in Maine from those middle school students who were started in 2001. Now 12 years later, they're in the workforce. He gives that great quote. Do you know the Wayne Gretzky quote? You can use it. He says, because Maine is not a big NFL town or Major League Baseball town, their state sport is hockey. And he says, when he was asked, why are you trying to bring laptops to kids? He says, well, people ask Wayne Gretzky, how did you get to be the greatest hockey player of all time? You're not the biggest, you're not the fastest. How did this happen? And Gretzky says, most players skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going to be. Gretzky had this great ability on the hockey rink to analyze the field of play and go to where the action was moving. And so Senator King said that. I want our state to be where it should be 10 years from now. And again, there's some good evidence that Maine is getting there. He also said that he knew that the laptop program was beginning to get some traction when people on the street started waving at him with more than one finger. You know, hi, Governor King, yeah, really, that laptop program, my kid loves it, it's great, and learning a lot. So let me just show you one example of a film that we made that shows that how this is applied in expeditionary learning. This is about a lot more than just sitting in class and accessing the internet. That's a good start. But hopefully these devices support kids getting outside of the classroom, doing project-based learning, service learning in their communities. And in this film, you'll see an example of kids who are going out on the Maine lakes. Let's see. And you'll see over here on the right-hand side, we've published a lot of information to help folks move towards these sorts of projects. This started about 5 years ago. We used to just publish a film and an article, and people, again, would say, well, that's great, I like knowing about it. But about 5, 6 years ago, people said, I'd like to learn how to do that innovation. I'd like to do that thing with the bugs. I'd like to do this thing that I saw in Maine. How could I start to do that? So we started publishing a lot more in terms of lesson plans and, as we call it, the anatomy of a project. So let's take a quick look at this one.
We have a lot of visitors coming down from both in the school and outside of the school, and they're going to really want to hear what you have to say.
I can't help but pause and say, one of the great things now in terms of this globalization of the learning is we can now show our films with captions in up to 60 different languages. Thank you, Google Translate. We started this about a year ago, and I didn't really know that it happened. And I was giving a talk in Brazil, and they said, well, we're going to show your films with the Portuguese, translation. I said, wow, thank you for doing that. Thank you for translating it. They said, we didn't translate it. You translated it. I said, we don't speak Portuguese. How did that happen? In fact, we had delivered the captions for our films. You can do it with your films. English language captions as a file there, and through Google Translate, boom, you can show your captions in 60 different languages. So I'd like to ask anyone in this room, if you speak another language, I'd love to show you the captions in that language, and you can tell me how good the translation is. Because the interesting thing is, it's pretty good and getting better, but very good in some languages and not so good in others.
How about Croatian?
Yeah? Are you pretty fluent?
Very fluent.
Great. Croatian? All you do is click on this CC, closed captions bar, click on translate captions, and there you see all these languages. Yeah. Afrikaans from South Africa, isn't that amazing? And I was showing these, I asked the same question, and the guy in the back raised his hand, he said, I spent 10 years in Iceland. Can you show that in Icelandic? I said, I didn't even know it was a language, but there it is. There it is. Islenska. Okay, Croatian.
You're going to bring your social studies notebook and articles down there. If you don't have your notebook handy, just be prepared to show them all the articles on the laptop.
Sorry. Okay.
And also, you're going to want to show them your Google Maps on the public art sites, okay? And all of those things you have to be prepared to talk about. Also, we don't want you to forget those two guiding questions. How does art reflect the community? And the other one is, how does science, math, and engineering connect to art?
It's called expeditionary learning for a reason. You know, the classic expeditions, you're out with a group of people trying to climb a mountain. And the goal and all of the consequences along the way are real. It starts to rain, and that happens. Your computer dies, that happens. You know, these things go on, but you're committed to this end objective together. So the relationships become important, and the connections become important. And when you offer someone the opportunity to engage in something real, there is nothing more exhilarating.
At the beginning of every expedition, we usually look at a district calendar to see, you know, what we're going to be doing for the fall.
We're talking about a schedule here at King Middle School where a team of 5 or 6 experts in learning, your teachers, can say, in order to pull off this particular project at this particular stage, we need to design a whole new schedule this week.
The first one sounded fine.
If we're working in the world and we're in any kind of engineering or design process, or we're editing movies, nobody stops after 40 minutes, puts everything down, and goes on to do something else.
This is where we start as a staff, is creating the model before we ask the kids to do it. So essentially we kind of figure out what exactly we're going to build. So here's a good example. There's like a science piece around metabolism, and that's a science content piece. Here's a math piece around size of their bacteria. This is a multimedia piece where the kids have drawn their work.
The scientists they were all like, whoa, sure, we'll come. You know, so they're all very excited to do this.
In expeditionary learning, we love to develop relationships between the students and community members, because the excitement that it generates in the students deepens their learning and lengthens their retention.
You have to help me with the pronunciation.
Okay, Pseudomonas aurantiaca.
Aurantiaca.
This is going to take us to where the maps are in Google, and then we go to My Maps. Students are working with Google Maps, and they're identifying all of the public art pieces that exist in the city of Portland, so that these different public art sites are going to be connected as a walking tour.
Hi, I'm Kate.
I'm Sarah.
And this is Kinetic Conundrums.
Today we're out here taking photos of already existing public art that we're studying in social studies, and so that we can make art proposals in language arts and then create our own MIDI model of public art in tech ed.
We don't learn about things, we do things. It's a lot different than saying, yeah, I can do that, I understand how that works, but when they actually have to do it, there's a huge learning process. There's a light bulb or an aha moment.
Drill that hole out right in the middle.
This class is like fun because they teach us how to be creative and to make our own designs. So we will have that experience as we grow along.
It's an incredible value that I think is lacking, where they don't have a class like this, or like an art class or music, or something where the kids actually have to do something, get their hands dirty and make stuff.
We get visitors from lots of schools. We get the people here from expeditionary learning schools, and they'll come in and they'll look at what we're doing here at King Middle School, and they'll say, God, if only we had one-to-one computing, and then we could do what you guys are doing. And then when the schools that are interested in going one-to-one come here, thinking it was going to be all about giving kids computers, but they discover it's really all about project-based learning. And they say, if only we had project-based learning, we could do that too, but we don't.
Let's hear it.
I say the same thing to both groups. You should have both. There's no excuse for not having both anymore.
Great, let me pause it there. Just want to show you some other things. So how was the Croatian? And in terms of the percentage of translation, what would you say? Was it 78%, 90%? Over 90%? 95%? Yeah, wow. Yeah. It's pretty astonishing. I think some of you must have started using Google Translate, as I did, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's gotten better and better. It's especially good in the Romance languages, people say in Spanish and in French. Less good in some of the Asian languages that use pictograms and ideograms, like Japanese and Korean. I showed it to some Korean educators, and when they were watching it in Korean, they just started laughing. There was a phrase one of the teachers saying, well, we want to get to the meat of the subject. And in Korean it said, the meat of the subject. So still have a ways to go with some of our idioms, but I do believe these new speech technologies are very exciting, not just for language learning, but for helping learners of all kinds be able to see text when they're talking, to be able to have text spoken to them. So I'll show you one example of a project where some of these speech technologies are really enabling more kinds of learners with different abilities and sometimes some disabilities to build on their strengths. I like to talk about this concept. You're familiar with learning anytime, any place. What about learning any path, any pace? Is it now possible in sort of this new digital learning 2.0? In 1.0, we saw that kids could learn anytime, any place. Information is always on. Are we getting to a point now where we're able to take kids from where they are and show them multiple different pathways to get to, if you want to look at the Common Core standards, if a kid is interested in sports, can we get them to math based on their interest in sports, sports statistics? Can we get them to language arts if they're interested in baseball? It's World Series time. A lot of people interested in baseball. Thanks to Ken Burns, we now know that the history of baseball involves a lot of important themes about American history. So I do believe we can have kids getting to higher standards based on their own passions, their own interests, through different paths. And what about any pace, a different use of time in learning? If you look at, again, the history of where we've come from, we've held time very constant. The school year, the school day, a school year is divided into 2 semesters. Even the notion of seat time, the Carnegie unit, which is still cited. How can we do project-based learning when we're still tied to the Carnegie unit, the amount of time kids have to spend in their seats? I've tried to, and maybe you can join me in this, send a letter to the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in Palo Alto. It used to be in Princeton, it's moved to Palo Alto. I've told them they invented the Carnegie unit. It's named after them. And they started in 1906. It's more than 100 years later. It would be great if they said, look, we started it, we think it's time to abolish it. Seat time, the idea of the unit, I haven't quite convinced them to do that yet, but maybe if they got some more letters from you all just saying, please, it's really the idea of students sitting in seats, this is not the kind of learning we need. I think we're also getting to a point where kids can, as I was suggesting earlier, if they're moving through content more quickly, we can give them credit for that. If they need more time, we can give them more time. Maybe we can have some more conversation about the notion of learning time. But please look at one of my favorite, I would nominate it as the best report ever to come out of the US Department of Education. You don't hear that said too often, do you? The best report ever to come out of our federal Department of Education. You can find it. It was published during the Clinton administration. It's called Prisoners of Time. Even back then, Secretary Richard Riley was the Secretary of Education. They were looking at how schools are so chained to a calendar and periods. And you'll see some of the history of how we got to where we are. Interesting to note, when they tried to standardize a course and a semester, they were doing it in higher education, and people at Harvard, believe it or not, were involved with this. Brilliant people they must have been to say, oh, a course should last 30 weeks, and it should be divided into 2 semesters of 15 weeks each, and class time should be maybe an hour a day, 5 hours a week of seat time. That was the definition of a course going back more than 100 years ago. And now we're able to think about, especially through some of these online courses, new approaches to learning time, a different use of pacing. So I want to show you this short video from California, from the Escondido Unified School District, that's EUSD. A different use of technology, and they started about 7 years ago, it says 2006, using the iPod, this is before the iPad, the iPod as a tool for helping all kids get to that first hurdle, which is 4th grade reading level, right? At the age of 9, you have to be able to read text for meaning, not just pronouncing the words, but beginning to read for meaning. If you look at the NAEP exam, Assessment of Educational Progress, you see a very flat line for 4th grade reading level and 8th grade reading level going back to the 1970s. As a nation interested in education and learning, you would think that we would get better and better at education and at learning, but it's been flat. 4th graders able to read at the 4th grade reading level. You know, and I share your belief, we have some new tools to do that. The iPod is a great one because in learning to read, in learning any language, the ability to record yourself and listen to yourself is a key skill. We haven't had the technology to do that. Kids are staring at pages, reading text, but they can't hear themselves read. When we record and play back, that's what technology was meant to do, record and play back. We're used to those two terms. We can use that in learning. It's used a lot in sports, for sports performance. It's used a lot in the arts for artistic performance, dance. Let's use that in learning to read. So this is a project that did that using the iPod down in Escondido. And we have here a teacher, a third-grade teacher from San Jose who can also comment on this because they started doing this about 3-4 years ago, right? So I just want to show you what this looks like. The key thing is, when these reading performances, they all go in, they're recorded, and then they all go into an iTunes playlist. The key thing is that kids can listen themselves, but their classmates can all listen to each other. It sets up a culture of reading performance in the classroom, and when it's recorded, parents can also go to the iTunes playlist and listen to their own kids read. They can listen to other kids in the class read. So it sets up this cycle of reading improvement between students, their teacher, and their parents. And you all know when we get parents involved supporting this, especially our kids from lower income backgrounds, English language learners, that's what we really need. We haven't had this tool before, but this is a great example of it. So, I'll just show you a few minutes of this.
You know, it's a daily tool for them. It's, in a sense, replaced a lot of the almost more high-dollar things we've had to buy. It's their dictionary, it's their encyclopedia, it's their recording device, it's, in a lot of cases, their pencil and paper now.
Using one of our standards is to use the tools, learning how to use tools to help us learn, you know, like a thesaurus, a dictionary. Okay, so the iPod is becoming more of one of those resources, an encyclopedia, a dictionary, a writing tool, a speaking tool, looking up information. It's just everything beyond what I could have imagined that I would be doing when I first started teaching.
And I think as far as the tool goes, the kids think this is my thing. This is my generation's thing, having an iPod Touch, and I'm using it to become a better reader and a better student.
We've been raising the green generation now. They're very in tune with being ecologically minded and whatnot, so that now they like the fact that we're not wasting paper and things anymore. We're doing things on a blog or on a wiki, and there's no waste there. And yet, I can still keep record of it. They can still have a record of it. It's there. It's just changed things so much. I look at it on a daily basis, and I think maybe it's, you know, is this really doing great things? Because there's no big bomb that goes off that suddenly every kid is on grade level and every kid is engaged, but they certainly are more engaged and more things are happening, and there's little bits and pieces everywhere throughout the day where you see the light going off, and I know that this tool has helped to do that.
The students are really engaging more with the literature, with the story, with the author. And I've had students that are eager to stay after school to re-record their voice because they weren't happy with the way things turned out. So they're practicing their reading, they're practicing their fluency. One student who came to me, he's reading at a 2nd grade reading level. And I just tested him, he's reading at a 7th grade reading level. And that's the student that was so eager to stay after school so much. So I can't tell you how it's changed. I can't really explain exactly how it's changed everything, except that my students are motivated, they're so excited to be using the iPods, and they're excited to learn without me having to say, okay, you have to stay after school and do this. So I'm just very, very pleased.
We have such a high percentage of second language learners that, and we don't realize how much the teacher is talking all day and how little time the students are getting for oral language practice until we put them on an iPod or GarageBand or something where they're recording their voice, and they just, you can really tell they need more practice. Oral language is so important. and they're just not getting enough of it in our school day.
There's less of me talking and more of them doing.
To be able then to listen to themselves and their own take on this, the buy-in in terms of learning in my classroom has been tremendous. And so I got excited and kind of extended that to a bunch of areas, to doing math facts, to doing reading strategies with leveled readers. And the whole thing, they can't wait, and the iPods are actually going out 3 times a day now. And we use the little quiet rooms attached to our classroom for it. And they take out the iPod, they read story summaries, they do fluency drills, and they listen to themselves. And here's what I've noticed. I've had kids say to me, you know, I never heard myself before. Now I understand when someone tells me my pace is too fast. Or I understand when I'm not pronouncing a word right, because as I listen to it and I'm reading it back, I go, oh, wait a minute, that was wrong. And they said, and the ability to be able to then erase a bad recording and send it to the trash can and do it over 2 or 3 times until you're happy with it, and then save that one, has empowered them. They're responsible much more for their own learning. It's not so much just directed by me.
One of the things I've enjoyed most about iRead is being a part of this profession.
Let me pause it there, and I think you got the sense this is about a lot more than just reading. When I saw these kids down in Escondido, because they had these iPods, especially iPod touches with the internet access, they were able to download all sorts of free apps. I saw kids doing tessellations, doing math games. Tessellations are these, geometric figures that nest perfectly together. M.C. Escher, I think, was the master of tessellations. But these kids were, and they wanted to rename the project because it was started off with reading and reading fluency, but very quickly, because they were able to access these apps, they were getting to math, they were getting history, using these online dictionaries. So it opened up all sorts of new areas for these kids, and rapidly, that's the other thing, rapidly improved their reading fluency. Within weeks, kids were starting behind maybe in 3rd grade. They're in 4th grade, they're behind, and they're reading at 3rd grade level. Within weeks, they caught up, and by the end of the year, they were already at 5th grade reading level. So they could do 2 to 3 years of reading just within a year. Very impressive. So I wanted to ask, it's Abby, right? So you've been doing something like this with iPods and iPod touches for 3 years, you mentioned, but if you could just share a little bit about how it's going. Great, thank you. And you mentioned in the Alum Rock district near San Jose, right? Terrific. One more short film I want to show you. It's from a project that I think some of you are less familiar with, but it's called School to Home. It's a laptop program now in its pilot stages in LA, Oakland, and Riverside. And it's funded by the California Emerging Technology Fund, CETF, which is an interesting fund. We're hoping to get the fund replenished. But if you look at the amount of money we're spending as a state of California on connection, on telecommunications, there's only like 3 companies left, right? When they merged in California, the PUC, Public Utilities Commission, said, okay, we're going to let you, AT&T, or you, Verizon, we're going to let you merge and buy out these other companies. You're going to make even more money. So we want you to put together a fund to make sure that the benefits of the internet and broadband come to low-income communities, and that's the CETF. As part of that, they've launched a program called School to Home. It's a 1-to-1 laptop program, again, for middle school students. And it offers professional development for both the teachers and for the parents. So So let me show that to you. Sorry. There's a website, just School to Home. Number 2.
Students who do have a computer compared to students who don't have a computer is a game changer.
This is about turning around schools, fundamentally, changing test scores, changing outcomes, and this is about turning around the larger community.
What we've seen in our young people at this school is a lot of success, and a lot of that success has been because of the great teachers at the school, because of the strong leadership, but also because of our relationship with School to Home. It's a place where we've been able to offer our students incredible access to technology. We've been able to integrate that technology into the lesson plans that our teachers are providing to young people. We've been able to really get parents engaged in a different way and leveraging technology to help that engagement. And School to Home really isn't just a program at this school, it's a part of the school.
Okay, let's pause though. Where did they go? My name is Javier Peña. I'm a 7th grade world history teacher at San Fernando Institute for Applied Media.
From Inca, Peru. Right here says 8. Oh, right here. No.
My classroom today was studying the age of exploration. Instead of giving the students the major concept, I exposed them to a series of artifacts where they themselves explore and try to derive the concept from the artifacts. They were exploring these artifacts of a sunken ship. They were trying to identify today where the ship might have set sail from, where it was going, and what motivated the expedition. They could do some basic Google searches to confirm or test their hypotheses about what they were looking at, giving them that technology tool to help them explore what their mind is thinking up at the moment.
Is it this one?
They're excited because they're getting the confirmation of their hypothesis immediately. And so it's definitely a lot better than just reading a textbook where answers are given. Here they explore for themselves.
To read a lot, so I downloaded this reading site where different teenagers, they write stories, and it's really interesting.
If there's a word that I don't understand, I usually just go on Google and I look for it. And I've always wanted to learn how to speak Japanese, so sometimes I just go on Google Translate and learn how to say different words in different languages.
We are moving forward, and technology is definitely a must. So, I mean, it's not an option anymore, it's a must.
If you're a middle school student and you don't have classrooms where you have strong software that's combined with quality teaching, then you're not learning as fast as your peers. And if that's not happening, you're not going to be prepared for high school and you're not going to be as prepared as you need to be for college.
There are communities where there's a high access to computers, and then communities such as ours that maybe the percentage is less.
In the last few years, it's really been embraced by our community, but at the same time, it's also been embraced by our teachers who have to utilize the devices in their classroom.
These students come from families and backgrounds that don't have the ability to provide the devices. And here's these students, and they're able to compete now because we provide them here at our school. And I think that gives them confidence, and it empowers them, and it makes them feel that they have the tools just like everybody else. So it kind of levels out the playing field, and it closes the achievement gap. They call it the digital divide of haves and have-nots. That has been an extraordinary effect of having a partnership with School to Home for us.
Start thinking more about scholarships, start thinking more about going to college. I think it gives them an opportunity to do that.
Well, I'll just pause it there, and you can take a look at it, the rest of it. It's funny, these middle school students, when they're interviewed sitting next to their parents, and their parents are talking about the value of this tool, and you just see the kids going, oh my God. One of the things the parents often say is, for the first time now, I can, now that we've got a laptop at home, and this is one of those laptop programs where the laptop travels with the students between home and school, as you can tell. It helps the parents lift their own involvement with students' learning and education. So I think you got a sense of from that father talking about looking at college options. All of a sudden, the parents get involved in that process. And it's important that they start doing that in the middle school years. This boy, I think his name was Eduardo, was that his name? Who was interested in learning Japanese. So this opens up all sorts of options for kids. Of course, there's no Japanese taught in the middle school. Would that there were. We'd love to see more of those kind of programs. But this 12-year-old can begin to learn a little bit about other languages through this device, through Google Translate. There's a Spanish-speaking mother towards the end of this film who says, you know, in Spanish, for the first time I'm able to understand now the communications from the school. Google Translate does that. The documents are all translated, and she can read them in Spanish, and she can respond to the school in Spanish, and it's translated back for the school in English. So again, lifting up the parental involvement is an important piece of these laptop programs, these one-to-one programs. There's a kid in there who says, his mother's talking for him, and he's kind of shrugging and looking a little bemused by it all. His mother says, my son is dyslexic, and he was not doing well in school. But through this device now, the books can be read out loud. His exams can be read out loud. And he's gone from being a disabled student to one of the best students in his class, because he's now able to interact with the content, with the curriculum, orally, verbally, instead of just looking at text on a page. So I think you're very familiar with this idea about how now we can now enable students with different strengths to use those strengths to achieve and show their strengths in school. So I love that idea of really taking those multiple intelligences that Howard Gardner talked about. First there were 7, and now there are 8. Do you know that he added this naturalist intelligence? People who are good in nature with plants and animals. He's writing some commentary about the multiple intelligences now, because this is the 30th anniversary of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. 1983, the book Frames of Mind. So you'll see if you search on Gardner's columns these days, he's talking about, you know, what's happened with MI theory, how it's being implemented, the fact that it's often misinterpreted, but you're seeing many more schools and districts who are enabling kids to learn from their strengths rather than perceive them as weaknesses. I love kids who now say I'm a visual learner, and that's a strength. You know, a generation ago, if you were a visual learner, you might be considered as someone who had a disability. So I like to cite George Lucas as a visual learner. A kid, if you had met him in high school and asked him, George Lucas, you know, imagine him being in your high school classroom. You know, what are you going to be when you grow up? He would have said, probably, I want to be a race car driver, but I'll probably end up being a car mechanic, because I like cars, I like fixing cars, I have my own car. And through several accidents of both a car accident and the accident of a friend of his going to USC, he then got involved with the technology of filmmaking. So he was not a good student. He wished that he had digital technology like we have today. He once said to me, you know, if I'd had a good education, I could have been a lot further along. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, what do you say to that? I said, you know, most people would be very happy to have gotten as far as you've gotten. So I will credit Mr. Lucas with his vision for our website and for this work. He very much supports this idea of different learning styles and different intelligences. And you know, his support for the Lucas Foundation's work has just been tremendous over the past 15 years. We have just a few minutes, and I know that some of you are involved with some one-to-one programs, and I was wondering if some of you could just share. I think I volunteered you because you were here early, but if you could just say a little bit about how you're implementing one-to-one.
Well, our school district went one-to-one all secondary last year.
In which district?
It's Lake Washington School District up in Redmond, Washington.
Yeah.
Right outside of Seattle. And we are both, I'm no longer there, but we both started working at the brand new STEM high school. So we started the school with kids who are very interested in the idea of problem-based learning format, as well as they got a laptop in their hand. So Melissa can tell you better about some of the things that they've accomplished.
They do some project-based learning as much as we can in settings, and of course you always look for more ways that we can actually work with other courses. So they actually have to take a visual and graphic arts class. They have Adobe products on our little Lenovo's here that we're trying to run. So a lot of good projects are coming in, but they're also self-motivated too. It's nice to work with a group of students who also kind of lead the way in a lot of competitions and different things that they do just to deploy the use of the laptops when they learn.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we struggle with, and I think a lot of school districts struggle with, or teachers struggle with when there's a new initiative of a one-to-one coming in, is the decision makers don't necessarily understand the power of the device that students are getting in their hands, and they put restrictions and limitations on what our kids can do. And so my frustration comes from we still control the learning to some extent by blocking social media, by blocking the ability for students to choose their own path. And a lot of that comes from helping to better educate our teachers. Very little professional development actually comes along with these big purchases of money. And then the other part of decision makers deciding on the technology based on whether or not they can get rid of textbooks, where we should be having a conversation of why would we even need textbooks if we have the entire world at our hands through the internet, and so how do we make that transition into a 21st century learning environment beyond just the fact that everybody has a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're
Yeah.
struggling with.
Do the laptops follow the students home?
Yes.
And what happens during the summer?
They come in for repairs, and then
Yeah.
they get them back again.
Mm-hmm. In some of these laptop programs, in some of them, students actually build the computers, and in many of them, students do the repairs as well. So it's an opportunity to create more curriculum beyond just what can be done with purchasing, laptops from and devices from the companies. So, does anyone else want to share, or are there questions as we're heading into 1:30 and we need to wrap up? But yes.
I really support one-to-one, but what have you thought about those programs where it's failed temporarily? Like
Yeah.
LAUSD.
Yeah.
You get such horrible press, and that's a setback to
Yeah. Yeah.
effort. What should they have done better?
This is a question, I don't know if you heard it, about laptop programs, especially LA, that's having a problem with implementing them. How many did they buy? It was the largest purchase. It was like 10,000, at least to start. Yeah. Yeah, anyone who's involved with large-scale technology implementation, including our federal government, should know better. But when it comes to laptop programs, I will say that the professional development, as you saw with School to Home, is the first thing. Before you distribute the laptops, make sure the teachers are prepared and parents are prepared. One of my favorite books, you can find it online, is a book by Matt Levinson, who was the technology director at Nueva Learning Center here in Hillsborough. Private school, very well resourced. About 5 years ago, they gave laptops to students, and he arrived as the technology director in August, and they said, oh, it's going to be great. We're going to give every student a laptop. And Matt said, well, wait a second. In September, the laptops went out to everybody at the same time. These kids ran circles around the faculty. Matt wrote a book about it called From Fear to Facebook. Check it out. Within a day, the students, and these are very bright students with a lot of programming skills, had hacked into the school's administrative system. So this is a process, of course, and not just the professional development, the training for all kids and students and teachers, the moving from acceptable use policies to responsible use policies. We're trying to rename those, not just the bare minimum of what acceptable use is, but really seeing this as a powerful tool that you need to take responsibility over your actions and your behaviors as a student. Yeah, there is a dark side, as we all know, to technology, and making sure that that's in place before all this happens, as well as just the straight IT implementation. Well, it's 1:30. Thanks for coming. We're getting the wind-up signal, and I'd be glad to stay on and answer some more questions. And for the folks whom I volunteered, please come up, and I have a few gifts for you from Edutopia. Thanks for coming.